first inning, he gives up a hit like through where like
Well, Clayton Kershaw wasn't an analytics fan.
they hit the ball to where
Shocking.
right it was like second base where the second baseman had been standing for 100 years. They move him right, and then they move him out of there. Ball gets through, Kershaw glares at the dugout, and that was the end of the shift.
Hello and welcome back to Dodgers Post. I'm Jack Harris, the California Post Dodger beat writer, along with Dylan Hernandez, our baseball columnist, here in sunny Arizona at Camelback Ranch among the grapefruit trees, which I didn't even realize these things have a story, the background of these.
Yeah, I think there's supposed to be a nod to Vero Beach, the Dodgers' previous spring training home. These things are actually edible. And I know that from personal experience.
You want to rip one off, eat one right now, or
well, like, it's kind of messy. No, it actually requires like some like an actual knife to if not you'll get stuff all over your hands. But
that's interesting. Did they have like orange trees all over Vero Beach?
I was only there 1 year and I don't remember it very well.
Okay,
to be honest.
It's really helpful. Thank you. Well, today is going to be a different kind of episode. We talked earlier this week about where things stand in Dodgers camp. I think for this one, we're going to go bigger picture. We're going to do a little bit of different Dodger history. But, I think, like Dylan, you and I were talking, when we launched this paper is a good example. The first 2 weeks of stories we wrote were about the Dodgers spending, how they've become this behemoth, how their on-field successes blossomed, obviously all the off-the-field stuff. So what we wanted to do with this episode is kind of go through like the last 15 years, take a bigger picture look at how the team got here, because I think especially now, every new season is almost like a culmination of this whole process. And I think the whole process is kind of informative of what have made the Dodgers what they are right now, and kind of some of the unique things that have put them in this position. And so we're going to go back to your beat days to start this. The glory days, the glory days of the Frank McCourt ownership, and then bankruptcy, and then MLB control of the club. I like when you think back to those days when you first started covering this team. How different did it feel from now? And like, can you kind of go through what the mood was like and how almost unimaginable I think it must have felt at that point that the Dodgers would get to this spot, even given, the kind of club they were and being in a big market in the history. But, you go back and you read things and you lived it like it was just such a dire situation at that point.
Yeah, I think the construction of this place actually is like a good place to start, right? Where they just didn't have money. Now, that was always kind of the feel. And my suspicion was always that's why Bud Selig, Major League Baseball had control of the process of who the team got sold to. I still firmly believe this, that they specifically were looking for somebody without too much money, right? Because if you could control the cost in a market as big as LA, well, that's going to suppress salaries all around the league. Right, and when they're building this place, right, obviously they partnered with the city of Glendale. This is actually technically in the city of Phoenix, right? The city of Glendale bought.
You'll notice the date lines in our story are Phoenix and not Glendale.
Right, and they bought a piece of land in neighboring Phoenix, and to construct this thing. But the city of Glendale is kind of the partner here, right? There's a lot of stuff nearby, that obviously that they're hoping to kind of bring tourists to. That was kind of the vision from the beginning. But there were like a lot of little things about the lighting here, that I just kind of remember. There were little things kind of here and there that you would read about. Okay, the city and McCourt are fighting over who's gonna, spend $100,000 to like install like these lights, right? It's like little things kind of here and there, and I think that was very kind of like, again, symptomatic of just kind of the situation that the franchise was in. I remember there was 1 year where I'm trying to think what year this was, probably 2010, I think, right? So, Joe Torre tells us, we're going to announce the opening day starter on day X, right? And, it's just so happened to be that was the day Frank McCourt was supposed to show up, right? McCourt doesn't show up, and coincidentally or not, Joe Torre says, you know what? We're going to wait, actually, to make this announcement, right?
Might not have been so coincidental.
Right, yeah. And again, he announces it, to when says, you know what, I'm going to announce it on day Y, and that coincidentally or not happens to also be the day McCourt's supposed to come in. McCourt doesn't show up. Joe Torre says, well, we'll do it day Z, right? Which is, again, when McCourt is supposed to show up. McCourt does show up. Joe Torre announces, well, our opening day starter will be Vicente Padilla.
Yes.
Why Vicente Padilla? Well, we didn't have anybody else, which obviously then led to us, right, the beat, going over to McCourt and saying, hey, like, did why couldn't you spend money to get a real starter?
Veteran move from Joe Torre.
Yeah. So I'm sure all a big coincidence, right?
The tweets of Vicente, I think there was a tweet from Jeff Passan this offseason that got resurfaced. It was like the 8 most scary words in baseball. Like Vicente Padilla is the Dodgers opening day starter.
But, I mean, to his credit, he had pitched well in the playoffs the year before. But, whatever.
but Joe Torre was still waiting for Frank McCourt to be there.
Right, yeah. And I mean, and to be honest, right, I do kind of think, some of us, I remember at the time, were thinking this would have actually not been a bad time to kind of pass the baton to Clayton Kershaw, right? And this is, as it turned out, Kershaw, I believe, got the opening day start the year after. But that was always kind of the feel, right? That they were, you're thinking they're the Dodgers. And I think, when Torre came over here, what I kind of heard, third hand was that he was under the impression that they were going to be able to go out and get some big players. Well, they did get Manny Ramirez, but that was because Manny Ramirez had completely burned down the bridge back to right in Boston, burned everything to the ground there. It was a situation where they just were willing to get rid of him, and they basically got him for free.
It was a distressed asset.
Right, yeah. So, and then, they entered bankruptcy, right? And I still remember this. They were in... It was either the day after, or maybe the first time we saw them after, they entered bankruptcy. The team was in Minnesota, right? We're in Minneapolis. And after the game, I'm in a bar, shock, and I happen to run in there. I see Clayton Kershaw and A.J. Ellis at a neighboring table. So I ordered, now at the time I was working for the newspaper on the other side of town, which itself was also bankrupt at the time. And I ordered a couple extra beers, and I walked them over to Kershaw and A.J. Ellis, and I said, welcome to the club, boys. So that's...
I'm sure they appreciated that.
But that's where things were at the time, right? And so, to go from that to, and fans kind of were upset, obviously. They weren't happy about, right?
They weren't showing up.
Yeah, and again, this was also kind of against the backdrop of the Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal Lakers, right? The three-peating team that kind of made winning seem just like it was like a birthright in LA. People just automatically expected, to win. And obviously to do that in baseball is like really, really hard. But for the team to not even be competitive, again, against the backdrop of those types of expectations, I think was just really kind of deflating. And eventually what forced McCourt out was, there was the Brian Stowe thing. Ironically, so the Manny Ramirez thing, even though they got him for free, it's just kind of another lesson. Nothing in life, boys and girls out there, nothing in life is free, right? So they get Manny. Manny just tears the cover off the ball for 2.5, 3 months. Honestly, probably as fun a 2 to 3 month period as I've had covering this team. I mean, just because Manny himself was just so fun, and just the whole thing was fun.
Our audience would love to know when Manny shows up at the ballpark now, he gets applause from a certain reporter in the press box.
So, but the thing is, so Manny though became a free agent right away, so they had to re-sign him, right? And it was a 2-year, $45 million deal with a lot of deferrals. And so here you are.
Wow, McCourt beat Guggenheim to the punch on one thing.
Well, but this is the funny thing was what happened though was, McCourt was trying to get a deal done with Fox. Major League Baseball blocked it, saying that it was under market. So all of a sudden McCourt has no money now. And it was actually literally one of those deferred payments to Manny Ramirez, even though Manny's long gone at this point, that actually bankrupted the Dodgers. Because the payment was due. They did not have like the $2.5 million or whatever it was to make that particular payment. Dodgers fall into bankruptcy. The league comes in and takes over the front office, that was weird, right? Because, you basically have 2 PR staffs, and you have, Ned Colletti was the GM at the time, and obviously he has no idea what's going to happen at this point. And so, you kind of went through a kind of weird few months there. Really, I think the biggest thing that happened, right, and one of our former colleagues, Bill Shaken, has written extensively about this, was the fact that because McCourt was in bankruptcy, it was a bankruptcy court then that controlled the sale process, right? Not Major League Baseball. And this is a big part because they could not, Major League Baseball at this point couldn't be like, okay, let's sell the team to somebody who's going to be reasonable in terms of spending, right? Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, they sold the team to, right? And I think Coletti had told me, hey, there's at least like one of these groups, if they come in, they plan to spend like crazy. And I'm guessing that was Guggenheim, right? And so they come in and things just change overnight. I mean, they watched, Logan White, great scout, the guy that drafted Kershaw, Corey Seager, Cody Bellinger, Jock Peterson, sees Yasiel Puig take batting practice once in Mexico City, which high elevation, balls flying. The Dodgers signed him to $42 million contract, right? And I even remember within the organization, like they're not used to that kind of spending. Mm-hmm. And I remember somebody in their organization called me and is just screaming like, I can't believe we did this. Like, how irresponsible is this,
It turns out it was just a drop
and
in the
turned
bucket.
out, yeah, it was just a drop in the bucket. They extended Andre Ethier right after. They traded for Manny Ramirez. And then the big one was them trading for Adrian Gonzalez in a type of deal, right? I mean, sometimes, sure, you'll take on a bad contract. These guys took on two. They took on Carl Crawford and Josh Beckett because they wanted Adrian Gonzalez, who, being a bilingual Mexican-American player who was obviously still really good, they thought he would be perfect fit for the market. And that was really, I think, when the Dodgers kind of announced, hey, like we're not going to be pinching pennies now. We are going to do everything possible to make ourselves as good as we can. Now, when they came in, they did say, look, the big spending is going to be just the beginning thing. Right. And, really we're going to try to build a farm system that's going to produce most of our players. And then what we're going to do is kind of like, I think Andrew Friedman's, the word that he liked to use, was we're going to augment the roster with free agents.
That's a lot.
They've kind of gone a little bit off course there.
Optionality, sustainable spending. But that's the interesting part about, I think, the next kind of era of this transition and evolution of the team is that after Guggenheim comes in and spends all that money early, and makes the team competitive again. They've been in the playoffs every year since Guggenheim's first full season. They wouldn't go all in, I think, was a big critique for a long time, especially once Friedman got here, basically up until, the Mookie Betts trade, but even in some of the years after that, it always kind of felt like, okay, they're a team that, yes, they have one of the highest payrolls in baseball. They have ever since Guggenheim got here. But they also ducked under the luxury tax, I think, in 2018 and 2019. They didn't sign any big-name free agents. I think for a long time, A.J. Pollock was the biggest free agent they brought in. And I think in hindsight, that period is really interesting to look back on now because in the moment, it caused so much frustration among the fan base, right? Like, the team is so good. If they just do a couple more moves, maybe sacrifice some of that future flexibility, optionality, whatever Friedman buzzword you want to use, like, we could win now. Right. But you look at it in hindsight, and I think what the Dodgers' argument would be is that all those years of building and being smart in their view and augmenting the farm system and waiting until they were able to get the kind of superstars they wanted on the kind of deals that could still allow them to do things, like getting Mookie Betts on a cheap trade with the Red Sox and an extension that now looks somewhat, under market maybe for the player he's been for the Dodgers, getting Freddie Freeman the way they did, and then obviously all leading up to Ohtani. When you look back at that period of the first 10 years of the Guggenheim-Friedman partnership, does it kind of feel like the constraints they showed then have been worth it now? Do you look at those things as exclusive, as they could have been more aggressive then and still done the things they do now? And do you feel like the foundation that was built there really is one of the things that attracted Ohtani and has attracted other players and put them in the position, which we'll get to later in this, but in the position they are now where they are doing everything imaginable when it comes to adding players and spending money and putting resources into this place. I mean, you talk about this place, it couldn't pay for lights. Now there's a whole new training facility building over here. But how do you look back at that period in hindsight now?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to, right, divorce yourself from the present. And whenever you kind of look at the past, I think you always kind of look at like the present, right? That like, okay, I mean, even like in your life, I'm sure, right? There might have, been events that weren't so pleasant at the time, but if you're doing well in the present moment, you kind of look back at that like, oh, like everything kind of worked out, right? Yeah, that's really interesting, I think, right? Because I do even kind of wonder, like, you look at this period right now, and there are a lot of things about the future you don't know, right? In terms of, like, let's just say there's all of a sudden there's going to be a luxury tax and no phasing in period. Let's just say it's the worst
or
extreme,
just
right?
straight out salary cap.
Right, straight up salary cap starting like next year, whatever. They're going to pay for these next 3 years, and 10 years from now you're going to look back at these championships. Well, were they worth it? So you can kind of slice and dice it however you want. I mean, I do kind of wonder how much of it was kind of an evolution of philosophy over time. Because I do think kind of what we had heard basically when they came in was that the playoffs are a crapshoot, right? And I think that was a philosophy that you heard a lot about, not just here but throughout baseball. And look, to a large degree, they are probably right. Now my argument was always like, hey, if you can get a guy that's going to increase, your chance from say 20% to like 30%, that's like a worthwhile risk, right? Because the whole point is to like win, and yeah. So at the time, basically, it was like, let's just make sure we get in every year, right? And I think if you kind of look at the lineups that they had back then, it was a lot more platoon spots, right? It was a lot. There were seasons where it was like Justin Turner, Corey Seager, and then every other position was basically like a platoon, That's obviously not what they have right now, right? And I think to me what it kind of looks like is around, again, going into that 2020 season, there was a shift in philosophy, right? That they kind of recognized, okay, you know what we're doing now works in the regular season, but you kind of need that difference maker to take you over the top in October.
Which was coming off
right.
their most painful postseason moment of that whole stretch in Game 5 of 2019.
Yeah.
And I think probably some of that feeling of, what is the end game here, right? Or we just keep going into the playoffs and crossing our fingers every year. And then, like you said, like the arrival of Mookie and some of the other moves they made that season, felt like a change, and then obviously immediately led to a World Series in 2020.
And Mookie was such a difference maker then, right? And the fact that like he won games like with his glove, really, right? I thought it was really incredible. Now that said, was it a shift in philosophy? Was it just opportunity, right? Because I mean, Boston basically gave this guy away for free. I mean, it's going to go down as like one of the worst trades ever. I mean, I'm sure like in Boston, there's still, I always see things pop up on my Twitter feed where they're like belly aching about that deal. But yeah, the right economic circumstances came in. It could be too, right? That circumstance came up, which then maybe that was what kind of triggered this change in philosophy, or
seeing how well that worked.
They got, like you said, Freddie Freeman on a deal where the Atlanta Braves, after this homegrown player leads them to the World Series. I mean, remember. I killed them initially, right? The Braves initially, like saying, like, "Hey, there's, you think that the Dodgers are like cold-blooded, like these guys." I mean, Freddie Freeman was a beloved player, I mean, Alex Anthopoulos, that was some cold.
Wouldn't give him one more year.
Yeah, and they didn't give it to him, which I to this day I still don't get. Now I'll still stay behind this. Like, Freddie shouldn't have been crying over there and stuff, but like whatever, So I think, they did that. And then the big game changer of all, right, is just Ohtani. It's a once-in-a-lifetime type, player, in terms of once-in-a-lifetime maybe. Again, I really do think, he's very emblematic of that culture in a way that I think makes everybody want to, he's Maradona in Argentina, he's Chavez in Mexico, where, kind of the way that culture views itself, right, with the virtues of its culture, it's all embodied in this like one athlete, right? And that's Ohtani for Japan, and obviously that's a wealthy country that advertises a lot. And then on top of that, the fact that like he doesn't seem to really care too much about money. I mean, he's never made, that part I guess isn't surprising if you follow like his kind of career from the beginning. He came here at the age of 23, joined the Angels for like a $2 million signing bonus. Had he come here at 25 as an unrestricted free agent, you could have been looking at a $200-300 million contract. Not many people are willing to pass on stuff like that, right? And so, because of that, he agreed to this contract where like everything's going to be like deferred, and if we have like a market crash between now and when he gets his payments, all that $680 million is going to be worth like $20. But he doesn't seem to care about that, right? And so all those three things have kind of contributed to building this huge economic advantage for the Dodgers that I'm not sure if you're ever going to kind of see replicated again.
Yeah, and I think, as it pertains to the big picture arc of the team, this is probably the one place where I think the front office and the ownership, when they talk about the long-term plan they had, has some credence, because Andrew Friedman, and a story we wrote before the start of the season, I was talking to him about just the farm system, how they've been able to maintain a good farm system even in the last couple of years when they don't have high draft picks or whatever. And he's going through it, and he goes, what's funny is when we were meeting with Ohtani, one of the things he asked was, like, how do you guys continue to have a strong farm system? How do you replenish the roster in this way? And obviously, if you compare it to like what he had with the Angels, where they just could never get enough talent around him, the fact that Andrew Friedman could sit in a meeting and go through all of these things that they do and then put the results on the table and say, look at the players we've brought up to the roster, look at the way we can trade prospects that other teams like to then add talent, look at the way that players who are impactful for us we can keep long-term if we want, if we feel like they fit in the long-term plan, I think was a big part of at least trying to sell this team to him as a place where you can not only come and be successful, but where if you are going to sacrifice all that money and you are going to put your trust in us to build a team around you, look at what we can do. And we've gotten so close to being really good, and you can help put us over the top. And that's kind of I think the part that, like, of these last couple of years has been satisfying for people around the team, is feeling like for all of the frustrations that they went through their first decade here, that they were still able to do enough of the small things right and build enough of a consistent winner in the regular season that they were able to turn themselves into a destination place. And that's kind of the phase we're in now, where they have become such a destination for players. Like, this is the part I think is really unique to the Dodgers situation now, and I think we referenced it on past shows, why, when they get used as this proxy when it comes to the salary cap and competitive imbalance or whatever, like, this situation is so different than I think anything else we'll ever see again in baseball, because you have a team that spent 10, 15 years building up the on-field success, also building up a lot of the business success. Obviously, like the television deal they signed, which has come under some renewed scrutiny lately because it did have some unique and favorable terms to the team, but that was part of what made the Dodgers an attractive thing or club to buy in the first place to Guggenheim, because the TV provision was part of the bankruptcy negotiations that McCourt and MLB had. The fact that they could tap into the business side and be primed to then take a player like Ohtani and market him in the way that they have. I remember, when Ohtani was with the Angels, I think the reporting was like he was worth $20 million a year in revenue for them. And I was talking to another owner in the league and I just asked him, like, how much do you think on the Dodgers he could potentially be worth? And it was like maybe triple the amount. And I think it's, now that it's played out, it's been even more than that, right? Like, he's adding hundreds of millions of dollars a year and what they're able to generate in revenue. They put that back into the team, and then they have a place now that, because of the success they've had on the field, because of all these other small things, the reputation they've built up over the years, they're a place that players want to come. And I think that's what we've seen over the last couple off seasons, and this one especially, is that they can take the money, they can leverage it against other clubs that don't have as much, but they don't even need to necessarily, like, outbid other teams, because players want to come here. Kyle Tucker's willing to take a shorter-term deal here, granted on historic annual salary terms, but leave a 10-year deal on the table to come here. Edwin Diaz is okay leaving the Mets, a place where he's beloved and has had so much success, for what might have ended up being a little extra money with the Dodgers. But, the money now has worked, and that's what's been interesting. Like, the money and the culture or infrastructure or whatever, I think the idea was to always get them to working in concert together. And the Ohtani factor has kind of tied it together in a way that now, when you look back on the last 15 years and how much the team has changed and the way they've elevated themselves at the top of the sport, does kind of make it, whether it always was going to work out this way or not, does kind of make it, you can go back and see, like, okay, they had a rough plan that they wanted to execute. They needed some luck along the way to kind of get the circumstances that would lead to this. But this has been something that's taken a long time to build, even before Shohei arrived, to get in a place where you can be spending this much and attracting this much star talent and building the kind of teams that they have.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the luck, right? I mean, I really do think, the Clippers under Steve Ballmer, kind of this latest, Kawhi snafu aside, they have been investing like a lot.
Trees.
No, and you look, and that's the thing. You do need luck, right? I mean, the Clippers tied themselves to the wrong superstar. I still don't blame them for the SGA Paul George trade was horrendous. They had to kind of do it at that time, but they kind of hitched their wagon to the wrong horse, and it kind of doesn't work, right? I mean, I think, you play this through, 10 different times with 9 other players, and my guess is that they will actually have a fairly high hit rate in terms of being able to turn themselves around. One thing too that kind of gets forgotten, I think, too, right, is that at the beginning of this process, the baseball was still kind of emerging from like the Stone Age, right, so to speak, in terms of the analytics stuff. And while most teams, yes, had incorporated analytics into it, right, there were degrees of it. And honestly, right, and this team was very aggressive, right? Obviously, Friedman was very aggressive with implementing that stuff in Tampa. They're pretty aggressive with it here, and not everybody was very comfortable with it, right? I think, again, working for the paper on the other side of town, I raised a lot of questions about the way they were kind of going about these things. Is this the way you go about building a team, right? And I had players come up to me during that time saying like, hey, whatever the questions you're asking are the same questions that we have, right? And I do think one of the big differences now as compared to, say, when they first came in was, again, the buy-in here, right? I think, again, at the very beginning, there was kind of an us against them type of feel to it where
players in front office.
Yeah, and I remember right when A.J. Ellis got traded, that was viewed in the clubhouse as kind of a shot at Kershaw in a way, in terms of like, hey, right, I had a player come up to me and say like, hey, we know what they meant by that, right? It's like, we're in charge, not you guys, right? And, looking back on it, like if something like that were to happen today, I don't think anyone would blink twice. And when I look back,
that's really interesting to me, because like the dynamic now is so different,
right,
in the way.
And when I look back on it now and kind of seeing the consistent way in which they've gone about it, right? I do think that they just thought that was the best move. It was just that I think, again, you're coming into like a new market. I think because, look, like we talked to Friedman now, and he's got enough success. He knows he's not going anywhere, right? I mean, his reputation is beyond reproach. He's probably going to end up in the Hall of Fame.
Shohei's contract.
He's going to end up in the Hall of Fame at some point. And so, like, now, like, look, he can tell you, hey, I don't know, right? There's some things like I just don't know. Back then, I think they were a little bit more defensive. They kind of came across as know-it-alls, right? That they had the answer, and whatever answer that they gave was the right one. And so again, in that context, it really did feel like that, right? That was, what are they doing, trading the best players like favorite catch? I mean, who cares, right? We talked about Manny Ramirez earlier, right? There were like 2 players that, right? I can't remember. There was Ronnie Belliard, and then there was one other guy that they just kind of it almost felt like they kept him around just because, like, they were like Manny's friends, and they kept Manny company in the corner, and so, like, yeah, that's what you do in sports, right? I mean, like, if a guy wants his buddies with him, you make that accommodation, and to do that for such like what it felt like, such like a minimal upgrade, right? Again, I do think at the time was viewed with a lot of suspicion, and you kind of compare that to where they are now, where it's like, it really does kind of feel that they got this thing to where they wanted it to get to. It just did take a lot of time over the years. And you do, again, I think Kershaw's like a really good example of this, right? I mean, I remember, on like his first start of the year one time, they had shifted. Their first inning, he gives up a hit like through where like...
Well, Clayton Kershaw wasn't an analytics fan?
They hit the ball to where,
shocking.
Right? It was like second base, where the second baseman had been standing for 100 years. They move him, right? And then they move him out of there. Ball gets through, Kershaw glares at the dugout, and that was the end of the shift with Kershaw on the mound, right? And
for at least a little while.
Yeah, and I would argue, right, that the last, I don't know how many years now, probably like one of the biggest kind of advocates, in a way, public advocates for this front office has been Clayton Kershaw, right? And so I think, again, you kind of see the way that changed, and that was never going to change overnight, right? I mean, I still think, I mean, let's be honest right now. You look at over what's going on with the San Francisco Giants, and they got a college coach who never played in the major leagues. Like, are they going to buy in? I mean, that's like still like a legitimate question, right? And so again, for the Dodgers to kind of go from where they were in that regard 15 years ago to where they are right now, I think really kind of speaks to, again, probably the consistency of, right, and they probably learned over the years how to better communicate certain things to players, right? I remember a hitter who, was approached by a front office guy who, and the way the hitter took it was like, what, is this guy trying to teach me how to hit? Right? It was kind of more, hey, look for this in certain counts, whatever. And the guy was more of a see ball, hit ball kind of guy. And he took great offense to that, right? Whereas I think, again, now guys seem to be very kind of open to it. And, the other thing too, right? And never underestimate the influence of like the leader, where Ohtani's a guy who uses every technological tool available to him. And my guess is that makes everybody else more, we see him now like out here, right, in the spring training fields. One of the great things about the way they kind of set this up was there are all these dirt paths that go through like where the fans are, and especially in the past, guys would always kind of stop along the way to sign autographs. Well, Ohtani discovered the shortest route from the places where the fans can't access over to the practice field, and now that's almost become institutionalized, right? I mean, everybody goes that way now, and I think though, in the more positive way, right? And look, like in Ohtani's defense, and I'm not bashing him, okay? It's just that he can't stop.
He doesn't sign enough autographs out there.
He draws enormous crowds. He just can't do that. But like, but similarly though, I think again, like Ohtani's maybe openness to kind of embrace a lot of the kind of different data and whatever is kind of the newest thing out there, he seems to be kind of interested in, probably makes the other players interested in that too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing when you talk about the front office clubhouse dynamic is that the fact that the front office has gotten as aggressive as they have in acquiring players, and in acquiring, they talk about the right kind of players, but I think, acquiring guys that kind of mesh what the Dodgers do here, which is like, again, the Dodgers don't have a lot of rah-rah guys in the clubhouse, or like, they're not great for us to like, get quotes out of, but they're guys that come in and just like are really single-mindedly focused on doing their job in a lot of different ways. I think that's been important. And then also just like, I think there's a better like openness from the front office's standpoint towards the players. You look at the postseason in the last couple of years, and for all the talent that they've added and all the money that the Dodgers have spent, one of the things that people in there will tell you is, look, we changed the way we went about our postseason routine, right? We started taking a players-only plane. We spent more time at the ballpark. We had to kind of change. We had to do a lot of small things to put ourselves in a different kind of mindset to win in the postseason. And that came from the players. It came from guys like Max Muncy and Will Smith and some of the other veterans on this team that went to the front office before the postseason in 24 and said, we need to change the way we do things to prepare. And they listened, and they found some common ground on how to make that work. Muncy in particular, like when he signed this new extension, he said one of the reasons why he wanted to stay here and maybe leave some money on the table is because he feels like he's a really valued guy in that clubhouse now, as the longest tenured Dodger, that he has real input. And that's another thing that, again, all of this is easier when you have great players and you have margin for error and money to spend, but that I think when you look at the evolution of the club, is not easy to achieve, but has really tangible benefits when it does. And I think as it pertains to the future, when the Dodgers talk about we feel confident, salary cap, harsher spending penalties, whatever the future might hold in a new CBA, part of what makes them confident is that they look at some of the small things they've done well, especially over the last couple of years, as things that will translate into the future. Now, look, I'm not saying it'll work. When we were talking what having the Shohei Ohtani financial factor helps with that they didn't have before is like, if you do have had the Trevor Bauer situation happen now, the Dodgers could have gone out and got another pitcher to work around it. Whereas when that did happen, part of the reason that they didn't win more before Ohtani got here, at least in those couple of years, is because that was one big swing that did not work out, obviously, and they didn't have a top of the rotation pitcher for a couple years, and it made it really hard for them to win. But so the margin for error right now is much bigger.
Yeah.
In the future, it might not be, but I think as they move forward, and part of what makes this year interesting is can they continue to hone in those smaller things that matter that can help sustain success in different kind of environments and continue this into the future.
Yeah, they're not going to win like this, though. I mean, well, because, look, it's just too hard to win. I mean, that's the thing. This is how good they are now, right? Is that this is kind of the one sport where it doesn't matter, like, if you're, like, even just, like, better than everybody else, right? The best team, like, almost never wins the World Series. The fact that these guys have the kind of margin for error to kind of, like, right, to have won 2 in a row, right, without even, especially last year, they talked about how they didn't even play well. That's how much better they are than everybody.
And that part is different. The crapshoot of baseball did not apply.
I mean, I think they're going to be competitive every year, right? I still expect them to be in the playoffs every single season. I think, though, that this level of dominance is going to be hard to kind of replicate if there are different financial rules in place. If those rules do get put in here. I mean, I do really think that that's why you got to enjoy this year, because this could be the end of this version of Dodgers baseball.
And why winning is going to be so important, because they're a dynasty now.
Yeah.
They're always going to be one of the best teams of all time. If they win this year, it's a different argument. As we wrote about the first week the paper launched, that was what we focused on, is if they win, are they the greatest team of all time? And it's a real argument you can have if they win this year, thanks to the 15 years from Frank McCourt bankruptcy. I'm sure people were really happy to relive the McCourt years for 10 minutes at the start of this episode. But,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the harder it is to get there, the sweeter it is when you arrive, even if there are some other things.
Well, it's a whole different world now, right? I mean, you did get a little bit of this when Manny Ramirez
the fans
was here.
And everything.
Yeah, I mean, Manny was electric, right? Everybody just loved Manny. He was kind of bigger than life, but like now, this thing is just, I mean, it's not even about just like one guy anymore,
now
right?
It's the whole franchise feels kind of like.
Yeah, and look, and here's the other part too, right? I mean, again, this, not to, I mean, I'm just, the whole they're bad for baseball thing is so stupid, but like, the one thing I did want to kind of point out is that we've been to 2 away games so far, right? One in Tempe and the other yesterday in Peoria. I mean, it's majority Dodger fans there. Right? Having the best player on the best team that's going to be on TV, national TV in October every year, I do think has benefits to it, right? And you just see it. I mean, it was majority Dodger fans at both of those games. Manny Machado got booed in his own spring training. I mean, park, he got booed pretty loud, and so, hey, whatever it is, like stuff like that, like I think it's a good thing. Now, you could argue from the other team's standpoint, I guess, that the talent would be more spread out, but baseball, here's the thing, baseball is not that popular nationally, right? I mean, again, to have a clear, whether, depending on which side you're on, either heroes or villains or whatever you want to call them, just to have a nationally recognizable team like this with recognizable players, I think for baseball is really important.
Yep. Well, that did not happen overnight.
No.
Even if some of the things the last couple of years feel like they might have. We will be continuing along, following all the things that shake out the rest of this spring. But I don't know, this was fun. We're kind of figuring out what this podcast will be about. Wanted to try a little bit different kind of episode style. So let us know if you enjoyed this chat or
if you didn't.
Yeah.
or leave on the comments, right, what you guys would like us to talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
true. But cool. All right. Well, no, this was a fun little trip down at least Dylan's memory lane, back to his beat days. I know you miss him so much.
Yeah, I mean, my life is literally flashing before my eyes right now.
All right. Well, we got still a month of spring training to go. Just about, a lot going on. You can follow along on CaliforniaPost.com here on this show. Until next time, thank you for watching.